Hey everybody, it's Christina of CraftyPaws. I'm here to share one final card with you all for 2017. This is a Happy New Year's card that I made with some Winnie and Walter stamps and some numbers dies that I had in my stash. So I've skipped over coloring the little teddy bear, but I thought I would share with you guys the Copic coloring for the little elephant and the little kitty. I skipped over the bear because it's relatively, the same really as the elephant. I'm just looking for where there would be cast shadows and where there would be shadows away from light sources. And I'm starting first with a base coat of the lightest color. I've chosen a W1. And then I'm marking in where I think the shadows would be. Under the face, on the lower part of the belly, the cast shadow from the trunk, the lower part of the feet, the underside of the arms, and so on. And when I'm comfortable with that, I go with a slightly darker shade. This is a W5. And I've mentioned this before, but I generally like to use warm grays, this W line, for living animals, or living beings, rather than the C, the cold gray line. And I'm just going over exactly the same areas, maybe a little bit smaller with that W5. Now I'm going back with a W3, connecting the lightest W1 with the W5 areas, bridging that space in between. And now I realize that my W1 was a little dry, so I've refilled that off camera, and while that's equalizing, the pressure's equalizing, I did the R30 for the ears. I'm also using an R11, which is a little bit lighter. You can't tell from the pen caps, that's not always indicative. And now I'm going back in with the W0 to go on the lightest areas of the elephant, the top of the trunk, the top of the head, just kind of blending in as best I can, because the W1 and the white of the paper were still too close. Now I'm going back in and reestablishing the darkest color. That's the W5 here. And I'm just reestablishing the dark areas, the shadowed areas, because when you go in with the lighter colors, it bleaches out that pigment from the darker initial layering of the darker ink. Now I'm going to go back in, again, bridging the gap between the lightest and the darkest with that W3, and I'm going from the underside of the trunk, a little bit on the back side of the trunk, so the top of the trunk is what gets the highlight, and I'm going back in. I probably could have added some more shadow to the far left side of the elephant's belly, but I'm just kind of going for a rounded three-dimensional look. For the cat, I decided I wanted to make a striped cat with kind of two tones for the base. So I'm starting with the under part of the face, and I'm connecting kind of with a swoop from either side of the nose to the outside of the face, and I'm giving the lightest colors here, the E000 and 00 for the belly and that underside of the face. Now I'm going in with an E11, and I'm gonna put in this as the base color for the rest of the cat. So for the face, the arms, the tail, all of those other areas, because this two-toned kitty is going to have a slightly darker rest of its fur. And I start with that base color of E11, and now I'm going in with the darkest color here, the E99. There's kind of a reddish undertone to this E color, and I'm just going to guess kind of where the stripes would be. Put some on the sides of the face, the top of the head, on the outsides of the arms, on the tops of the tail, on the edges of the sides of the belly, and on the outside of the legs, and a little bit on the inside or underside of the legs. And I think that that's pretty realistic. I'm not a cat person, I'm really more of a dog person, so I don't really know how these cats are colored up, but I did look up an image on Google Images for colored cats, striped cats, I think I looked up. And this kind of patterning seemed pretty typical. I'm going back in, reestablishing some shadows. I decided the ears inside are going to be that R30. That's a very common color that I use for blush and inside ears for animals. And I'm going back in and reestablishing that E11 base color. I've also used an E13 to kind of bridge the gap between the E99 and the E11 for those darker areas of the kitty. And I'm really pretty happy with how this little striped cat came out. I'm finally going to reestablish the darkest, the E99 colors for the stripes, just because I didn't want it to be washed out too much with the other layered colors. I'm going to quickly just fussy cut around the kitty. I'm using my favorite spring-loaded scissors by Fiskars. This is great for folks with arthritis or even not. I just find these precision scissors really great for fussy cutting. And I'm going around fussy cutting the whole thing, just like I did for the other two critters, but I didn't share that on video. I didn't want this video to be super long. And then I'm going to do the background now with a smooshing technique. I wanted the background to be one layer, but I wanted it to have some visual kind of energy, and I thought the smooshing technique on Bristol paper, which is great for heavy saturation for liquids, would work well. And I'm using my heat tool to dry in between. I'm skipping over various parts of this, but I did 3 layers of that smooshing, which is basically putting out ink on a non-porous substance, spraying it with water, and then dabbing the ink onto the paper. And I like how that kind of has an energy to it in the background. Now the sentiment is also from the Winnie and Walter stamp set called Happy Dance, and I've stamped it out, but I'm wiping away the birthday part of the sentiment. So now it says wishing you the happiest without the of birthdays. And I'm stamping it out twice because you can see I didn't get a very good impression. And part of that, I think, is just I didn't push it down very well. So I'm going back in and restamping. But unfortunately, it didn't do it as good a job as I was hoping. So I'm doing it again. And at this point, I moved the paper, unfortunately, on my MISTI tool. So it's not as crisp a stamping as I would like. You can see it kind of smeared a little bit and shifted. So I'm taking my Copic multiliner pen. This is a 0.3 point Copic multiliner pen. And I'm just going in and filling in where I didn't stamp very well. And I don't think anybody could tell that it wasn't a clean stamping at the end of it all. Now I'm going to cut out using some numbers dies 2018, and I've positioned each of those little dies in place with a tiny bit of washi tape, just because the washi tape will release off the paper pretty well. And while off camera, I also die cut these same numbers from a whole bunch of scrap cardstock, which I've stacked together and glued together. So that's actually like the thickness of a thicker. I've stacked 5 of those 8s together, and then I'm gluing on top the watercolored smooshed paper. So I'm doing that for each of the numbers. So the 0 gets the, I just wanted to make sure it was turned in the right direction because the top and the bottom are the same for that 0. And I'm gluing on the watercolored little die cut numbers on top of the stack of cardstock numbers that I had cut out and glued together and stacked all together. So now each of these numbers has a really nice dimension. They feel super solid, and yet they totally match perfectly in those spaces from the card front. And I really like the look of that. You can see the inside 0 and inside the 8. I didn't stack those inside areas because I wanted it to be flush with the card base or the card front. And I'm just gluing in everything else with my favorite wet glue. That's that art glitter glue. And I'm using a little Spellbinders 2-in-1 embossing rounded edge to poke in the inside of the 8 and the 0, just so that it fully is flush against the card front. And I'm using some double-sided foam adhesive, but I'm cutting out the little tiny pieces so that each of the parts of these little critters get supported from behind. So even the tiny little squares, I cut in half so that it will fit properly behind the feet and the hands. I just love how cute this little dancing bear is. I love the lift of that shoulder. It's so cute. I just think that the image is so perfectly captures the cuteness of these dancing bears and elephants and kitties. And I'm just putting double-sided foam adhesive behind the animals as much as I can so that even if this goes through the mail and it gets squished, it'll come back and it'll pop back up. And the dimension of the critters matches the thickness of the 2018. So it really does look in person as if these critters are standing on top of or jumping off of the 2018 here. And that's really it. I'm putting on this double-sided foam adhesive, taking my time. I've accelerated the video about 3 times here, and I'm taking off the release paper, and I'm going to be popping that last kitty on top of the 8. And for a finishing touch, I thought I could use a little sparkle on this card, so I have picked out some sequins, and I'm just using my same glue to put some single sequins in different sizes and some layered sequins. So you can see there, I've layered a medium and a teeny tiny sequin on top of one another, and I really like how this adds a little extra sparkle and a little extra dimension. And I find that using tweezers is great, especially if my hands are a little shaky. The tweezers, this is a reverse tweezers that I think works really well. And that's my finished card. I hope you've enjoyed this process video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you guys have a wonderful 2018.